Welcome to another episode of the Creative Mind podcast. My name is Maike Döling. I'm your host, and my guest today is Kim Farrant. Kim is a celebrated film director and known for her raw and authentic storytelling. Her latest movies are the #1 Netflix film The Weekend Away, Strangerland, starring Nicole Kidman and Joseph Fiennes, and the psycho thriller Angel of Mine. Kim also developed her own masterclass, Raw Truth, and in collaboration with the Down Under Film Festival Berlin, she will bring this life-changing workshop to Europe this year. So today I want to know everything about her work and especially how she supports actors to access their raw truth. It's an absolute honor to have you here today. Welcome to the podcast, Kim Farrant.
Thank you, Micah. I'm so thrilled to be here.
How are you today and what keeps you busy these days?
Oh, wow. I'm well, thank you. A lot keeps me busy. I have 3 film projects in various stages of progress. One that is casting at the moment, that's fully financed. Another one that is like we have an outline, and then another one which is a devised project between myself and 8 actors. So we're creating it together and we're doing a series of workshops in different countries to make that happen, where we gather and we improvise and we do somatic practices, and those things help kind of unfurl personal stuff in the actors, which then informs the characters and the plot. And so, yeah, there's quite a lot with that going on. And then as you mentioned, I coach masterclasses. There's actually 2 masterclasses, Raw Truth in Performance, and then another one, Sexuality on Screen.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach those around the world. And then I also have private coaching clients, like actors that I work with, that maybe they're on a TV series and they need ongoing support in a role, or they're auditioning for something, or they're on a film or doing a play. So there's like 3 kind of components of my creative life. So I'm busy, very busy.
Beautiful. So let's go back a little bit. I would like to hear a bit of your story, how you began your creative path. I would say today you're a director, but I know that you started as an actress as well. So take us a bit in your story.
Okay. Well, my creative path actually started when I was a kid. And I still have like a lot of like literal like books that I made with pictures and that I'd draw, and stories that I'd write. And it was always like wanting to tell stories. And I think campfire rituals are really good for that, because that was like when we go camping, we tell a story around the campfire, and that really excited my love of narrative. Then I went to dance school first when I was, I think I was 18, at Tamalpa, which was run by Anna Halpern. And that was a year-long program. And one day at dance school, which was very much an expressive program, she healed herself of cancer through dance. And so I was very curious about her work, and I was very young and open. And one day we got to speak while we were dancing. And I was like, oh my God, acting. This is what I want to do. So then I went and studied with Eric Morris in LA at American Youth Theatre, and I did a year of that. And then I went and studied in Australia at the Actors Centre for a year. And I loved acting school. And also I didn't have enough emotional understanding of what was happening in my body at the time to be able to keep my instrument open. I just didn't know what I didn't know at that time. Now I know that I had emotional blocks that were in the way of me accessing certain feelings. But at the time when I would hit a block, I would think, oh, I'm just bad at acting, or I'm just not good enough. So that was going on at the time. And then also there was one day when I was at acting school towards the end of the second year, where one of the teachers turned up drunk and they got sent home. And it was a very long time ago, under a very different guard than the school is under now. But I was asked by the head of the school if I would direct the play that day. And so I said yes, and I did. And I felt like, I'm finally in my skin. Like, this is like, I finally feel like this is what I'm supposed to do and be. And I felt at home inside myself. And it was such a beautiful feeling, because before then, whenever I'd go up on stage to act, I'd want to like shit my pants kind of thing. So, yeah. So directing was like the seed had been planted. I finished acting school. I did some short films and video clips and commercials and whatnot as an actor. But I started writing stories again, like from when I was a kid, started writing again. And then I made a couple of short films, and I was very lucky, like Hugo Weaving, who's, from The Matrix and all these amazing films. He starred in one of my short films. And then a couple of other quite famous Australian actors were in the first one. So then I applied for the Australian Film, Television and Radio School to do a master's with honours in film direction. So I already had some experience with some heavyweight actors. And then I got into film school, and then I did 3 more years of study. So that's like 6 years of study in total. And I loved film school. I made 10 short films. I learned a lot. I also learned some stuff that didn't serve me. And I then spent time after film school letting go of those ideas. And I think that's the case with any institution. There's stuff that's going to embolden you to find and discover and tune to your real self. And then there's stuff that's going to corrupt your mind with like unnecessary information or paradigms of thinking. So yeah, and then I started, directing. So I've done documentaries as well as drama. So I actually started like I got a documentary into Cannes, and then I made a feature documentary, and then I made my first feature drama. And I was always making like half-hour dramas or short dramas on the side, but I actually kind of came through the pathway of documentary in the industry first, did some television in docs, did the television in drama, and then continued to make the films that you mentioned. So yeah, it's been an unusual path, and then I started like in 2000 is when I started also teaching and coaching on the side. And the beautiful thing about being a director and also coaching actors is that I am working with actors all the time. So whenever I go to do a movie, that part of my instrument is so open and honed and alive because I use it daily. Whereas, a lot of directing is like working by yourself with your computer until you're in production, and then you're surrounded by people in this intense environment. And then you go back to being you and one other person in the edit. So I love about working with actors is all the time is that my access to my gifts and my channel is constantly being utilized. So it's right at my fingertips whenever I go to direct.
Yeah.
The pathway.
Wow.
Yeah.
You said something that you also had your own blocks as an actor. How did you work on that? Or how did you find out that these were blocks and you were good enough? So what was your own path in that finding your own truth?
Yeah. So a great question. I would say life experience was a big part of that path, relationships, partners, but also working with actors like for such a long time. I would see, like my experience is how you do life is how you do acting. You can't, if you haven't accessed an emotion truthfully in yourself, like presenced it, felt it, allowed it to move through your body, expressed it in your life, then the neural pathways that have the imprint of that sense, that feeling, that sensation, they won't be able to be accessed in the acting. right? If you've not felt them in your own real life. So we can only draw upon, something that's a known experience in the body. Otherwise, we're mimicking. And that's totally a way of acting. And a lot of actors do it. A lot of children are so good at acting because they can mimic. And then there's a lot of children that are just very intuitive and they're just feeling the response, the emotional response in their own body as a response to other actors. But I noticed for myself that, I've done a lot of therapy, a lot of different modalities of personal growth work, that the more access I had to my own emotions, the more acceptance, welcoming, blossoming of those feelings and their expression, the more truth came into not only my acting, because I do still act in the classes, like I'll improvise, I'll get up and run a scene with someone to demonstrate, but I also noticed in my directing that I had more capacity to hold more space for deeper emotions. So if you're directing an actor and the director is emotionally blocked in some area, the actor will feel it at an unconscious level, and often they will modulate their performance. They will like shut down that area in order to know that they're safe. Because if they're bringing an emotion, let's say it's wild rage, and they can tell that the director emotionally is not that open and it's not conscious, they'll just be picking it up through the field unconsciously, and their neural pathways will be alert to, oh wow, I'm not safe to fully unleash with this person, therefore I'm going to either hem it in or I'm going to block out the director, right? I literally block them out and just focus on the other actor and know that actually I'm safer to not go to the director in any way for affirmation, validation, or support. So what I also learned is that for me to hold the deepest space where all the feelings are safe for an actor to unravel in service of character on one of my movies, or if I'm in a masterclass in the coaching scenario, then I have to be constantly accessing and allowing and expressing my own emotional instrument in my daily life, so that when they meet me energetically, they can feel my openness. They can feel, oh, I've got permission. All is welcome. I'm allowed. She's safe. She's got me. She's not afraid of my intensity, whether it's my intense grief, my intense longing, my intense confusion, my intense rage, my intense sexuality. She's not afraid. She's got me. I'm held. Actors need a container in which to unravel in. So if I'm not that holding that container of I've got you, you're safe, I'm right here, all of you is welcome, they'll then feel like they have to keep their own alpha witness, right? Their own like consciousness, awareness on at all times, which can be the antithesis of what you want. When you want your omega, when you want your feelings and your emotions to flow, you don't want to have to be so holding the space. You want to be like, okay, there's a container in which I can unravel in. There's a river banks and I can now be the emotional flow. So that's my understanding. It's not just how you do life is how you do acting, but it's also how you do life is how you do directing, and how you do directing and how you do that in your own capacity to feel is going to impact the performance you get from actors.
So that means the way you show up, they show up. Or
yeah, the kind of extent to which I can meet all the parts of me will create the container in which they feel held by me to meet all the parts of them, to express all the parts of them. If they don't feel held by me in that way, what they'll have to do is go, okay, I'm not supported there, I'm not held, even though the director's saying all the right things, but emotionally, if they know you can't hold me, you can't handle this, right? You want it and your psyche wants it, right? But you don't actually have the capacity to fully presence it and be with it. right? So then the actor will go, okay, I've got me, I've got this. And you'll notice, like, even in my body language, I'm kind of tightening up a bit. I'm like going into fight mode, right? I'm like, I've got me. In the I've got me, then there's not like necessarily the full accesses of I can let go and trust whatever comes through my system in service of character. When the channel opens and I'm fully letting it all through in service of character, that I can trust that I am held by something bigger than these feelings, right?
Yeah.
So I want to be like a bigger anchor, a bigger mountain for them so that they can feel safe to unravel, that they can feel safe to not know the next moment, to not know the impulse that's going to come through. That's when the acting is electric, when you're not pre-planning it all in your mind, but you've set up all the circumstances, and that's where you use your witness self. You know, I need to walk here on this line. I need to cry on line 5. You know, I need to pick up the pen on when I say that line, right? That's all you're given circumstances, where I'm going, who I am, what I want, inner obstacles, outer obstacles, etc. And then you've got that container, and then you want to be able to let go, trust that that's there, and let go and allow the emotional flow to come through in service of character. You don't want to be like plotting where you're going to open, plotting where you're going to cry, right? You want to be able to trust that all the inner objects, places, people, events, you know, timeframes that you've planted are all alive, and that you can just trust the right now moment with the other actor, responding to them in the moment, that everything is going to go off like a landmine in character.
So, 2 questions. The first one is, in your experience, I mean, you're in that industry for many years now, what are the biggest challenges actors have to show up in an authentic way? That's the first question.
Okay. What are the biggest challenges that actors have to show up in an authentic way? So my experience is the biggest challenge for an actor to truly bring their authenticity lays in their own inner safety. How connected they feel to their young self, to their emotional flow, to their emotional triggers, which is often formed in childhood. And if the actor, if that young self doesn't feel safe, that all of me is welcome, all the different feelings that might be stored in the system, then what I call guardians, and what many people call your defense mechanisms, survival mechanisms, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, will automatically kick in, whether you like it or not. So if the child within feels anyway unsafe, those guardians will kick in. So in the acting, fight guardian looks and sounds a little bit like, I've got me, I'm not listening to you, I'm going to do my performance the way I'm going to do it, no matter what you give me or what anyone says. I've got me. Because fight guardian is often, I can't trust that I'm supported by others. I can't trust that I'm safe to feel in the moment, right? Then you've got flight guardian, which looks and sounds like, I want to get the fuck out of here. And in the acting, what happens is when something happens and the actor gets triggered and that safety for that child within feels threatened, you know, am I going to get laughed at? Am I going to get yelled at? Am I going to get rejected? Am I going to get beaten, right? If I show this thing, if I allow this expression, whatever it is, you know, rage, grief, loneliness, longing, sexuality, those fears arise. And so flight is when you leave your body temporarily and you lose your lines. You forget the lines that you know off by heart, that you've been learning for weeks, and you know every single line. But something happens in the moment where you feel unsafe and you leave your body and you forget the lines. So that's flight. Freeze is where at home you've rehearsed the scene 1,000 times, or maybe even in the rehearsal room, and you feel so comfortable and all the emotions are flowing when you need to. And then you get on set and you go to film it and suddenly you feel unsafe. Like maybe that producer was looking at you strangely, or maybe you had a weird moment with the makeup artist just before you went on, or maybe you just feel intimidated by 100 people watching and suddenly you freeze and you go numb and you can't feel anything and the emotional instrument is blocked, right? So that's freeze. And then fawn is when the overwhelm, like the child within, something happens, they feel unsafe, they feel overwhelmed. And then what they do is they give up. So like animals in the wild, right? They play dead, they fawn, which will kind of, it's like an activism to make sure other animals don't eat them. They'll think they're sick, they won't eat them, blah, blah, blah. Or if someone's being raped, they might fawn so that they're not killed. It's a survival mechanism to get through the moment. In acting, it looks a little bit like and sounds a little bit like, you know what, whatever, just do it. Fuck it. It's a giving up kind of energy. It's a acquiescing, giving over of power.
Yeah.
So the most terrifying thing I witness for actors is the fear that one of their guardians is going to come up. You know, they're going to go into fight mode, they're going to freeze, they're going to leave their body and forget their lines, or they're going to just like lose their spine and give up in that moment. And so what my understanding is that anything that you haven't addressed inside your system will live in your nervous system, right? Because everything that's ever happened to you is recorded in every cell in your body.
Yeah.
And that's why we have sense memory. We smell something, we taste something, we touch something, we hear something, you know, and it activates memory. It's because it's all recorded. So if there's anything that got recorded that was in any way traumatic to the system or didn't get processed at the time and met with attunement, love, and acceptance, then that thing causes like a calcification in the body. It causes a gripping around that experience or that memory. So then your emotional instrument, right, which is all housed in your nervous system, our nervous systems can't differentiate one emotion from another. So if you've got a forbidden ban or you have learned to exile, let's say, your desire, right? Your nervous system can't tell the difference between desire, rage, grief. It's just shut it down, right? So then everything else gets shut down. So whilst we keep those desires forbidden and locked away and exiled, we're also losing access to the full gamut of our rage, grief, playfulness, authority, whatever it is. So my experience is anything you're not addressing in your life, anything that's been unaddressed, exiled, splintered off, forbidden, will prevent you from accessing the full spectrum of all of your feelings in service of character in the moment that you want it, which is the moment that it counts, on stage, on set, audition room.
So how do you, maybe as a coach, work with the actors to address these coping mechanisms?
So the coping mechanism, the guardians formed because an event happened. You experienced a feeling that was untenable, right? That was too much for that young little tiny nervous system to comprehend, calibrate, be with. You became overwhelmed in that moment. And so your innate body intelligence, which is so brilliant, goes, that's okay. We'll go numb. That's okay. We'll leave our body. That's okay. You know, we'll fight. We'll stand up. That's okay. We'll go. Fight is also a good executive function. People who get really in their head, that's a coping mechanism, right? To make sure your survival is intact. Or that's okay. You know, we'll surrender. We'll give up. We'll give over. And so those mechanisms, they're just there because an event happened, which had a feeling, which then formed a belief. They're the blocks. That's what we're addressing. What are the beliefs that underneath that is an emotional experience that never got attuned to? It never got met fully with presence by our parents or our primary caregivers. And so it's sitting lodged in the body. So what I do in my coaching is I help people first identify what's the belief that they've got associated that's getting in the way of them accessing a certain part of themselves in service of character. And then we drill underneath that into what's the emotional content that's never been met, that needs presence, that needs love, that needs expression. Once that gets an expression and it gets met, and awareness is a solvent. So anytime you bring light and awareness to something, it can start to dissipate. So in that way, even if the block is like a major trauma, even some awareness on it is going to start to soften it, which is going to give you more dynamism, more malleability on how you work with the block. It's not to say you're never going to get triggered again.
Yeah.
Right. The blocks that's those cell memories are still going to possibly get activated, but you get a lot more spaciousness, pause, and ability to see, oh, wow, I'm in that story, i.e., let's say the story was, if I get angry, I get punished, or if I get angry, I get rejected, or if I show longing, I get, humiliated. It gives you more awareness to go, oh, wow, I'm in that story. That's not actually happening right now. That producer is not actually staring at me like you're a piece of shit. They're actually just staring at me, hoping that we make the day, by the end of 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it gives us that one step back, that pause. And then I help people work with the tools that I teach to work with the beliefs and also valving the emotions, releasing those, often pent up emotions. Might be pent up grief. It might be pent up, like longing, might be pent up rage, might be pent up sexual energy. So it gives you more capacity to valve some of the feelings so that they don't feel like, which is often what I hear from actors, they'll say stuff like, I feel like if I actually let myself fully cry, that it'll never stop. Right? Or I feel like, they'll say to me, Kim, I'm very scared of this rage. I feel like if I express it, I might kill someone. So when something is so held down for so long, it creates so much energy around it. It is like a fucking volcano.
Yes.
It will explode. So what we do is we titrate gently towards gently valving little bits at a time so that you have more capacity to work with the intensity of the feeling at your will, when you want it, in service of what your character is going through moment by moment. So rather than your emotions using you and running you, you get to use your history and your emotions and everything that's stored in your sacred body in service of art. And that's my understanding. Like I always say to actors, you can do all the craft work and you have to know, your character's gait, how they walk, how they move, how they sit, how they breathe, how they, like run, how they dance. You have to know their accent. You have to know what they want, their objectives, their fears, their inner obstacles, their dilemmas, their needs, where they're going, their backstory. But you can do all of that. But in the moment that it counts, when you're on set and the cameras are rolling or you're on stage, if that child within feels unsafe, in any way gets triggered, and your guardians come in, fight, flight, freeze, or surrender, then you're screwed in that moment because you're in defense mechanism and you're not open for the flow to come through. So that's why we do the balance of craft and the personal work. It's got to be a balance. Otherwise, you're all craft. It'll be, it'll sound true, but there's no like sparks in it. There's no electricity. There's no danger. There's no like spontaneity. It's going to feel very controlled and clever, but like leaves you feeling nothing as an audience member. Or if you're all emotional flow and no balance of the craft, it's just going to feel indulgent, right?
Yeah.
So you need both, and you need both in balance. But my experience is a lot of actors don't get taught or modeled that it's okay to feel all the feelings even the untenable ones, because this is the other thing that's really interesting and complex. So when you're accessing emotions in service of a character and what they're feeling, because your nervous system, as I said, cannot differentiate between one emotion and another, anything that's locked around that emotion is going to also come through. So you have to be willing to meet all the feelings that arise. For instance, let's say if you're working with sexual energy and you needed to be a very sexual character and really bring that, then maybe you're going to hit some shame when you start working with your sexual energy, or maybe you're going to hit some fear. But if you're so in the, I've got to be my character, and my character is really sexy and they're so open and vivacious and they've got no sexual shame or whatever, and then you're like, oh, fuck, and you're starting to feel shame, then you're going to have to shut down in order to not feel the shame. Well, you're also then shutting down the sexual energy. So my encouragement is when you are not only rehearsing, but even, and I'm so bold as to say this, even on set, right? And I'll talk about this in a moment, you need to be able to valve whatever's coming through.
Yes.
So in the rehearsals, you want to allow space and permission with yourself, the other actors, the director, for knowing, like, you know what, we're diving into this sexuality piece for this scene. I might cry. I might have a shame, porthole that opens. I might feel some rage, and I'm going to allow myself to express it, not on someone else. I'll remove my body away from the other person if we're doing an intimacy practice, but I'm going to allow myself to valve it so that I can keep the channel open of the sexual energy, right? And here's a great example. So Pedro Almodovar was directing Penelope Cruz in Parallel Mothers, and I saw Penelope at a beautiful forum that she did in Santa Barbara, California, where she spoke about an experience on set where she had to learn that a child had died, a baby, and she had to not cry for the whole scene. And every time they went to run the scene, she would cry. And she was just like, I couldn't stop crying. There was like all this grief and I just couldn't stop. And she said, bless Pedro, he understood, he knew that me hitting this scene was activating a lot of stuff that was inside of me. And so he just let me cry. And I cried and cried and cried all day. And then the next day we went to shoot the scene and the tears had moved. I didn't need to cry anymore. And so it's the same understanding that I have. You can't expect your emotional body to truthfully open if you're not willing to meet everything that's inside your house, inside this, beautiful temple that you have that's been lodged along the way. So when you're on set, what you can do is, let's say a big portal of grief suddenly comes through and you don't want it to be there. You just allow it in that moment. And then you can, attune to that little one and say to your young self, like, oh my God, sweetheart, whoa, there's a lot of grief here. I so hear you. I so love you. I'm going to give you a little couple of minutes to valve some tears. And then tonight, when we finish filming, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to meet you. I'm going to meet all these tears. And right now, in service of our character, we're going to put a lid on the tears, but don't you worry, I am coming back to you. And you must go back to them later that night and attend to the grief portal that opened, right?
Yeah.
Pedro's obviously got enough money that he could run the scene all day and then reshoot it the next day. Not everyone's going to have that. But if you valve a little bit in the moment so that your young self recognizes, oh my God, you see me, I'm heard, you get me, you know that this is here and we're meeting it, you're meeting it. And then I'm going to attune to you later. Then you can actually, in service of character, your witness self, which is that like awareness, left brain, I'm here, I'm in a scene, I'm on set, and I need to put a given circumstance on top, which is going to allow me to run the scene without crying, i.e., if I show tears, I'll get shot. Or if I show tears, I'll get arrested. Or, you're going to put something on there that's going to help you lit it in service of your, that's appropriate to the character and what they're going through. And also a director can always cut around a moment like that.
Mm.
So that's the other thing to know, is that, you know, you can always do a second take, or if it's the last take, you can cut to the other actor in that moment. Or you can, as the actor, let's say you started crying when you weren't supposed to, quotes, you can then redo the line in that moment,
Mm.
right? Without the tears. So there's quite a few ways to work with your system so that it knows it has permission, so
Yeah.
that it doesn't shut down all feelings in order to try and stop one feeling.
Oh
Makes sense?
God, there was so much in. I also remembered moments. I mean, I told you before we hit the record button that I also have my acting past.
Yes.
I remember moments that, I mean, you know, today I know that my story was I had difficulties to show up with my emotions because that meant to be rejected.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
then that's why also the teachers in acting school always said, why is it so hard to access your what's really inside? And sometimes it took a lot of time. And if in the moment I accessed it, it was so much coming out like a volcano, like you said.
Yeah. It
And
would
then
feel
in the next
unsafe.
moment I felt I'm too much. That's too much. I can't, people cannot handle that. And then I felt too much. And then I felt ashamed because I was too much. And then I shut down
Shut it down.
again.
Yeah,
Like,
all makes sense, Micah. It's so
oh,
makes sense, and I see it all the time.
yeah,
And you're not too much. And somewhere along the line, that child self, I would imagine, learned that they were too much for that parent that didn't have the capacity to be with your feelings.
yeah,
So for that parent, it was too much for them, but that doesn't mean you were too much. They just didn't have the ability, capacity, understanding of like, oh, wow, it's just a big feeling that needs to move through. It doesn't mean my daughter, you know, is an endless stream of tears or an endless bundle of rage. But a lot of parents don't know that. And sadly, a lot of teachers don't know how to work with actors to help them feel safe enough to feel their feelings,
yes,
right? Because their focus is very much on the craft, and then the personal work, the emotional instrument work, is like left to these young people like yourself when you were at acting school. And we, you know, if we haven't been taught that by a therapist or like by mentors from a very young age, of course we're going to be clueless. We're not going to know why our system suddenly shuts down or why we suddenly blurt out so much that there's no given circumstances left, that it's all emotion, right? So bless you. I'm so sorry that that experience turned you off acting for a period of time, you know,
mm.
out of the hurt of I'll be rejected. Yeah, I'm really sorry that that happened.
Ooh,
And
that's yeah,
yeah,
it's touching. I mean, you know, also what I do today with the coaching work and also the podcast and everything I bring out, it is still my path of expressing. So I sometimes I say to people I feel more like an artist than ever before, even if I'm not acting anymore, because I feel like I'm expressing, you know,
yeah.
and that's the path. But what was I had a question. Now I forgot
Well,
it
I
because
actually have
I'm
a
moved by my own story,
yes,
right?
yes. And I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Like, you know, who who was the voice of it's you're too much? Who couldn't handle emotion? Who found it too intense, too painful, wanted it all to be okay, was scared?
The one who couldn't handle was my dad.
Okay,
And there
okay.
is a moment when I was a child that comes over. I forgot that moment. And okay, I'm going to tell it now here. Sometimes I
Yeah,
tell the story. I forgot the moment. And I also went to therapy for a while. And then there was one session where this story came up again. I was a little child going into the sleeping room of my parents and just wanting to say good night to my parents. And normally I get a good night kiss. And on that day, my dad said he suffered from depression and anxiety and everything. And he said on that day, no, today it must be okay without a kiss.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
I went into my own room and I was crying until I fell asleep, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the moment which I worked with also now in the last years as well, going through that moment again, taking that little child at their hand and saying, it's okay, it's safe. And I could also realize that that moment when I was expelled from acting school was actually the same moment, but because what they told me was, you are not vulnerable enough. We cannot
Mm-hmm.
see, we can see that there's something inside, but you're not opening up. And in that
Mm-hmm.
moment I was just angry and I was like, I cannot
Yeah.
understand. I can feel what's inside myself. I cannot understand how you cannot see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Total sense.
today, I mean, that's also now 20 years ago. Today, I can understand that that was the exact same moment, like,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the rejection. And so that was my work in the last years to deal with that fear of rejection and still being able to open up.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I would also offer that, children pick up on all the unexpressed feelings of the parents.
Yeah.
So if your dad was working with depression energy and anxiety energy, then you're picking up on all of that. So if I have a need, if I if I have a need of love, or I need to say goodnight or whatever, and then the answer is no, it's basically, it's too much.
Yeah.
Because then you're also aware that, like, oh God, if I have a need, I would imagine a belief got formed for that young self that if I have a need, the other won't be able to cope. Like, it's too much for them. Like, they'll collapse.
Yeah.
So then it's like, for survival, you need to keep it together.
Mm.
You need to be okay. You need to be able to self-manage. You need to be able to fulfill your own needs, all of that stuff. So then, of course, when the emotional instrument goes in front of, you're at acting school and they want you to be vulnerable, you're like, your little one's going, I'm not going to be vulnerable, because then the other is going to collapse. It's not rational, but the other is going to collapse.
Yeah.
They're not going to be okay. And they're going to reject me. So why on earth would I be vulnerable? Makes total sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, hence that is like case in point of why I do this work.
Yeah.
Because I see actors with so much inside, and then accessing it and truthfully expressing it, like honoring it without putting like the whipped cream on it, without making it more palatable, without making it more, likable, right? Is so scary. It's so terrifying for that young self. So we're really helping them learn how to parent that young self. We're really helping them discover and excavate the stuff that got blocked in the system, clogged in the system, that gets in the way of them fully feeling like, I celebrate, I see, I accept, I own, I allow all parts of me.
Yeah.
All the parts, including things like shame energy.
That's also why I found your work so interesting for me, because it hit exactly that. I mean, the raw truth. That's exactly why I became an actress. Because I wanted to express. And what I experienced the last years also with my podcast, in the beginning, I recorded a lot of solo episodes, like where I was telling my story and with different topics. And that were most of the time the stories where I was like, do I really publish this? I mean, that feels very unsafe. And it was always the sign. And that's what I always tell today also to my clients. This is the sign to do it.
Yes, that edge. Yeah.
And I learned that the feedback for these kind of episodes was always like, Oh my God, you have the same topic like me. I feel so
Yeah.
met in my feelings and needs and this topic and nobody talks about. And there I felt like, okay, this is the way I
Yeah.
have, yeah, to express.
Beautiful. Awesome. I love it. It sounds so great, the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming back to your work, if as a director, I mean, is there a difference when you work as a director or as a coach or in your master classes, or how does your work look like in directing?
Yeah. So in directing, every actor works differently
Yeah.
and every actor's emotional instrument is different. And it's very much around the actor's willingness.
Mm.
So
Mm.
if an actor has a willingness and an openness and a humility to want to go deeper when they can't get there themselves, like, and if there's like an opening in them to support, to help, then I will bring out all my tools and I'll work with them. If there's no willingness, there's no point,
Mm.
because then I'm trying to force something on someone, and I would never want to do that. That would feel like a violence to them. So it's very dependent on, when I'm casting, I'm really scanning for how open are they? Because even if they're the most experienced actor in the world, it's still possible, we all have blocks,
Mm.
that there might be a certain block. And at some point, I could help them. So, for instance, when I worked with the amazing Swedish actor Numera Pace
Mm.
on Angel of Mine, she was so open. So, like, she said to me when I met her on Zoom before we agreed to work together, I told her about my processes and tools and stuff. And I said, how do you feel about the idea of working with any of those tools? And I said, I'm open either way. And she was like, oh my God, I would love that. Directors are so scared of me. I never feel like I meet a director who's fully like in the pit with me, challenging me, helping me, supporting me in that way. I would love it,
Mm.
you know. And so she was amazing. Like, I taught her a shaking process. And she was up at 3:45, 4 a.m. doing that process so that she could open her instrument before then doing character prep and all the other stuff that we would work on before going to set. And just had, she rang me one day when we were filming at the end of the day, and she said, like, I so feel the most incredible thing is happening. I feel so prepped and I understand my character so much. And when we go into the scene, I don't know what's going to happen.
Mm.
I don't know what's going to come through. And it's so exciting. And it felt so affirming to me of like all the work we'd done together, the whole processes that she'd learned so that she could show up to the scene fully present to the moment, knowing what her character thinks, wants, needs, etc., but not predetermining what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So it was
absolutely.
so alive and unpredictable. It was so juicy and dynamic. It was amazing. So, yeah, so I offer, like, I try and ascertain first, how does the actor like to work?
Mm.
Do they just want notes on character and performance, or do they want support around opening their emotional instrument in moments where they might need it? And I'll respect whatever they bring. If an actor does want the support, tools that I use are like, before a take, we might have them expressing out loud with code words, so they're not like naming anyone from their life, but like expressing out loud to someone from their life to really get the emotion that they need to access, like the objective, I want you to forgive me. And maybe that, emotion is like the need for validation, like feeling insecure or whatever. So they're going to express out loud to someone that they want to forgive them, right?
Mm.
And they're going to charge up the performance by having, opened that neural pathway of that need, that want, and that emotion, then feeling safe to come through. So then when I call action, it's fully alive, or we might do a sense memory right before a take. Or we might do a tail slate and like have all the crew and everyone ready to button on. I do a bit of sensory with the actor for like 30 seconds. Everyone waits patiently. And then I call roll, and we literally in that moment go, as opposed to waiting another 15 seconds for roll sound and speed. Scene 42, take one, mark it, set. Oh, just need to move, tweak that, action. So, it's like tools to help activate the system right before a take. Other things that I do is I'll call out stuff in the middle of a take, action words like intimidate her, press, like beg him, cajole, whatever. And we can always just, what they actors know and what I tell them and the sound guy is that we're just going to re-go over that line, right? So that my noise is not in there. And that way you've got the continuity of the performance being so alive, and I'm just tweaking one line right as it's happening so that they can keep the flow and the energy of the performance rather than everyone having to do a whole new take and the amount of time that takes. So I'll call out action words. I do things like dance. Like we'll have the characters dance either by themselves or together. I'll get up and dance. I'll get up and improvise with them before a take, and I'll fire them up, or I'll lead them through a guided, visualization to help them take to a specific place in their heart so that their heart's like fully open. So I'm very active on set if the actor wants it.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it feels for me like you're not only the one who's guiding it from outside, you're also going emotionally in that space.
Totally.
Yeah.
So if the actor, so for instance, if an actor needs to access full rage and I can feel they've got like a dimmer light on because they're scared, I'll go in and I'll say to them, I'm going to show you my rage. And then I'll put someone on the wall that pisses me off, and I'll let myself free express and free associate to that person, so that in the field of the set, everyone, including the actor, has seen the full capacity for my rage, and I let my body move, and I'm like I'm screaming and whatever, and I've warned everyone it's going to happen, and it's not personal to anyone on set. I let it out, and then the actor's nervous system goes, oh, it's okay to show, blood red rage. Their nervous system feels safe that they can bring it and something bad's not going to happen to them. Yeah. Or if it's sexual energy, I'll often dance. So I'll really, like, if they need to be in their like slutty whore energy, let's say, I'll I'll get up, I'll put music on, I'll like while they're lighting or whatever, and I'll like fully immerse in that part of myself. Again, all with boundaries. I've told everyone I'm not touching anyone. But I'm showing the energy as a permission stick. Not like this is how I want you to do the performance, but more like this is my expression of my sexual energy and I allow it fully, and then they're like, oh, okay, I'm safe. I'm allowed to bring it. I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm not going to get yelled at. I'm not going to get laughed at. I'm not going to get rejected. I'm not going to get hurt, if I put in this part of myself.
Yeah.
And then another tool that I use, which is really beautiful, is having the actor tell me a story. And look in my eyes and look in my left eye in particular, because that's our right brain emotion. And so we look left eye to left eye, and then they share a story of something that's really potent to them. So let's say the character in the scene is falling in love, and they want to show like that swooning love, like just billowing heart. I'll get them to tell me a story of like when they've fallen in love, and that'll like bring all of those chemical responses back, all that energy, all that longing, and then we go into the take.
Yeah.
So that's just a few tools. Plus, the other big one is if I see they're in a voice, like a voice is gripping them, like you're too much, you're not enough, you're weird, anger is ugly, the world's unsafe, my sexuality is too dark, like whatever. If they're in a belief, then I'll do a tool with them, which is a tool that I use in the workshop, to help unblock that belief. And they'll, that just open the instrument again, and then they can go for it.
Okay. So Can you maybe share some tools? We had three different things now. The first one was how, oh, yeah, to take care of that inner child if something comes up during shoot or casting or whatever, to take care of that inner child afterwards. And also, what do you recommend to actors to prepare to be open on set? Like, what can they do before to be ready when they are there?
Well, and this is why people do my workshops, because there's a lot of tools, and you really want to be in person to really understand it, because we move the bodies, and it's an emotional memory that gets created from the tool. But I'll just speak to the first one, because self-care and attuning to your young self, that in itself is a whole bunch of tools that I teach. But the premise of that is that you are bringing loving awareness and presence to that young part of you, knowing that it's just a feeling, it's not a fact, right? It's a feeling that needs to be met and expressed. So like, for instance, in the example of, wow, sweetheart, young self, I see there's all this, and some people like to call their young self a name, like Cheeky or Phoenix or Little One or whatever it is. But you're attuning to that part, you're telling it you're going to attune to it later, but you're valving a little bit in the moment so that I don't feel the pressure cooker there. But when you go back to it later, like, you're meeting it with such a loving curiosity, like a loving detective going, oh, wow, okay, all right. So you feel that if you show your need, you're going to get rejected, that you're too much. Oh, sweetheart, I'm right here. You're not too much. I love you. I've got you. I see you. And those feelings totally make sense. Tell me what else. What else is there? And then maybe they have a little cry because they feel seen by you. Because often people are just railroading, stomping over their feelings, right? And not attuning to that young part, judging it, going, you're so fucking weak or whatever, instead of going, oh, baby girl, or baby boy, like, oh, little one, I see you. That makes sense. Gosh, that must have been so awful. And I understand why it's really hard for you to open. I've got you. Tell me what else. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. I love you. Like, you're really parenting it. So and then there's a whole bunch of tools around that I teach in the workshop that you'd want to come and do the workshop to learn. So then your second question is, how do you prepare for the emotional instrument to be open?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a big, like, two-part to that. One is the personal work has to be happening in your daily life. Right? You have to be attuning. You have to be allowing space for your emotions to come through, just like a writer would sit down at a desk to allow the muse to come through, right? To allow those voices that just channel the creativity. As an actor, you need to allow time each day to meet whatever's in the emotional instrument. And the more you meet it, the more safety and bond that gets created between your young self and your adult self, or your spiritual self, or your wisdom self, whatever you want to call it, your awareness self. So the more practice you just daily practice of meeting that young self, the more trust that gets built, the more access and accessible flow to feeling states will come through. And when you're meeting those feeling states, there's got to be like a grace, a compassion and understanding, as opposed to, oh my God, you're so fucked up. You're so insecure. You're so jealous, or you're so miserly, or you're so infantile. Like, you cannot judge that young self. They're just feelings that need to be felt. So we do practices that are somatic based. An example is that shaking practice I was talking about with Numi, which is an Osho Rajneesh meditation, the Kundalini shaking. So you do, 15 minutes of shaking. And as you're shaking, you're also expressing like all the feelings, not through words, but through sounds and emotion and sensation. So you're bypassing the mind and you're tripping the nervous system to go out of the rivets of the old story that says making noise is bad, expressing feelings will get you killed, whatever it is, showing emotion will have you rejected. You're going beyond the mind by making sounds, right? You're vigorously shaking. And then when you meet a porthole of some kind of emotion, let's say you meet grief or vulnerability, you can slow the shake down so it feels safe to move through. But, animals in the wild, if they have like a confrontation, they will shake. It's an innate survival mechanism that we all know, that when you shake, feelings move through, right? So that's why the 15 minutes of shaking, then you do 15 minutes of dance. In the dance, you're sending a lot of breath through the body and you're moving and expressing. So you're teaching your nervous system, as I'm moving my body about, all parts of my body, sex center, belly, solar plexus, heart, throat, thyroid expression, brain, all parts of the body are letting go and are learning I'm safe to feel and move my body. Because a lot of actors do a lot of acting from the head up and their bodies are like stiff planks. And all the acting is happening on a very cerebral, palatable level. And, it gets pretty boring. It's possible. A lot of actors have whole careers like that, but it's very heady, right? So you've got to teach the nervous system that I'm safe to feel, which is why when you do somatic practices, somatic meaning of the body, you are allowing the feelings to move. And teaching that I'm allowed to move and express at the same time. And then your performance gets embodied. Your nervous system's learning, oh my God, I can like show my rage and be like slamming my hands through the air or stomping my fist or, whatever it is, stomping my feet. So there's a bunch of somatic practices that I teach in the courses, but that's an example of one of the practices that will help you get into your body on a daily level. Now, another thing is that's just the daily self-care to teach your nervous system to open. Then you've got all the character prep work that you want to do, where you're understanding what the character needs, where they're going, what they're feeling. And then we have a whole lot of exercises that we teach around, personalizing the moment, how to take the personalization tool that's, like Ivana Chubbuck's substitution, right, is an example. What I teach is a kind of allowing the sentences to actually match of your personalization. So what your actor self is drawing upon from your own life that is parallel to what the character is thinking and feeling and saying. So it gets so specific that you're only substituting one, tops 2 words per sentence. So that, and sometimes no substitution at all. You're just literally what the character is saying is something that you could say in your own personal life. And because of that, it gets so juicy, so rich. The language is like imbued with so much life history. And again, all in service of character. You have to do all your character prep first, or your script analysis. And I do those exercises. I teach a bunch of exercises that help you do script analysis on the floor in your body, right? And when I say on the floor, I don't mean necessarily lying down. I just mean up, out of the chair, out of the desk, away from the screen, away from the notepad. So you can get the character in your body first to flesh out, what do they think, feel, know, understand, have memory of certain objects, people, places, persons, timeframes, and events. So they're all fully alive before you choose what from my own life am I going to use to parallel this moment. And that's when you start getting into match personalization. But, there's a lot in the masterclasses. I'm giving you like some headline tools to like help activate it. But again, one of the big unblocking tools that I teach, which I'm not going to speak to on the podcast because it's a deep process that needs emotional holding with me present. But that tool is like a daily go-to if you were on set that you would do to make sure you're in the right now moment, in your sovereignty, feeling your spine, feeling your worth, so that you can open any emotion. I don't believe in when actors say, oh, I need to be really nervous in this scene, therefore the nerves that I'm having, I'm just going to use them, right? Because nerves, fear, unsafety is going to lead to what? It's going to lead to your guardians coming in, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So you're not going to be embodied. You're going to be giving like a wordy delivery of something that's not in the body if you're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So you have to clear whatever fears are arising before you step on set. You have to clear them when you're on set. If you go to do a take and it's suddenly your close up and suddenly that fear has come in, these tools that I teach, you can do on set in the moment prior to the take to help open the system again. So there's, yeah, you kind of come out with like a massive toolkit from the workshops to understand how to meet your instrument, how to work with the blocks moment by moment. And then there's also doing deep personal work, like doing things like these master classes or working with a therapist, you know, so that you have more access. Any kind of somatic therapist, I always say to people, don't talk therapy can get you so far, but you want to get it in the body. So somatic therapy is where it's at in that way.
Yeah. So you already talked about the work you do also in the masterclasses. What exactly can people expect from the raw truth, this masterclass?
Well, they can expect, if they've listened to the last hour, they can expect a lot of the processes that we've discussed. They can expect a very intense, beautiful, healing, fun, profound journey into themselves and unearthing a lot of feelings. And a lot of boundaries get set so they can learn about having boundaries, also emotional boundaries, you know, with themselves, with others. They get a lot of tools for how to open the instrument, how to access part of themselves that have been locked out, shut down, unavailable, judged. There's a lot of tools on how to how to act opposite others from a place of internal safety. So trust building tools, bonding tools, so that they can feel more safe inside themselves, but also working with another actor, working with multiple actors. Yeah. And a lot of like self-worth is the hugest, biggest thing that seems to come out of the workshop, where people, you know, the most common thing people say about my workshops is it changed my life. And how you do life is how you do acting. So it changes the acting when your self-worth comes online. And often the self-worth got diminished when that young self, that childhood self, had an experience which formed had an emotional response that was overwhelming and formed a belief. And then they shut down that part of themselves, exiled it, blamed it, shamed it, you know, taught themselves that they were unworthy, unlovable, bad, etc. So we're also working with your relationship to your psyche. How do you speak to yourself? How do you work with that young self? And what's your relationship to what I call, based on the teachings of London Winters and Justin Patrick Pierce, your alpha and omega? So your consciousness, your witness, your alpha self, your ability to see and hold awareness, and then your omega, your emotions, your flow, your energy. So you, as we said before, you need both those things in balance to be able to act.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't have awareness, you're just going to be indulgent. And if you don't have emotions, it's just going to be dry and boring. So you need both those parts of yourself. So sometimes for some actors, we're really building their capacity to witness and watch their feelings, and also the stories they create around their feelings.
Yeah.
With other actors, the focus is more, so that would be like cultivating more alpha, more awareness, more capacity to hold and presence of feeling, right? Whereas with some actors, we're cultivating more access to their omega, to their feeling state, to their emotional flow, where they then can allow it to come through without having to clamp it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so interesting. And you also said that you have a second masterclass, which will maybe one day also come to Europe.
Yeah,
So
would
what
love
is
that.
that about?
So
Sexuality
that's
on
called
screen, right?
Sexuality on Screen. And that masterclass I started developing, well, I started working with sexuality in acting around 2012, because I'd work in these other workshops that I'd run or in other classes in studios and acting studios, and I'd meet actors and I'd be like, wow, this actor could be really amazing if only they were connected to their sexuality. Or this actor is really amazing and their sexuality is so unconscious and so spilly outy and so like running them that they can't actually play a character that's not constantly sexualizing. So I noticed there was a lot going on in the sexual arena. And then also I'd hear all these terrible stories of things that would happen on set or with other actors or with directors and producers. And I was like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. And you'll see there's like videos of me online talking about, like way back then, talking about like, we have fight coordinators, we have, stunt coordinators, we have safety supervisors. Where are the sexuality supervisors? Where are they? And then the Me Too movement hit at a certain point, and then they brought in intimacy coordinators.
Yeah.
But for years, I have been talking about this, and then I kind of developed a workshop back in, I think that one came in like 2016, to directly address it. Like, so I'd been teaching sexuality in like studios and stuff, but then I was like, okay, I need an actual masterclass, which is like a 4-day immersion into it that teaches boundaries, like how to recognize that you have a boundary, how to recognize that you're allowed to have a boundary, how to recognize what that boundary is, what that is for yourself, what it sounds like, what it would look like, what the physicalized expression of the boundary would be, no, like whatever it is. So to calm your nervous system so that you can in any way contemplate sexual touch or any kind of physical touch without leaving your body, without shutting down, without freezing, without fawning. So a lot of people do sex scenes from a place of numbness, freeze, fight, they're not actually connected, fawning, just giving over, which is terrible because then, and it's not their fault, it's just a mechanism that's protecting them. But then what happens is the other actor feels like they're trespassing them. The other actor feels like they're invading them, or a perpetrator. They feel like a perpetrator and it's awful. Or flight, and you just leave your body and you're vacant. And then what you get is non-specific, generalized, unconnected sex scenes, which as an audiences watch them go, why do I feel really uncomfortable? It's meant to look like they're in love with each other and they're fucking and they're having a great time, but it feels really weird. That's usually because one or both actors have left their body or they're disconnected, and the audience energetically can feel it. So boundaries is a huge part of what I teach in sexuality. And then there's this whole very methodical, particular, rigorous process we go through of step-by-step, incremental steps towards touch. So you don't just go from 0 to 100. You don't just go from like, okay, we have to kiss in the scene. So, how about I kiss you? We do not do that. There's a very specific use of language that we use to open the brain to a question regarding that. And then a very particular set of steps to go from no touch to eventual touch, so that step by step, you're constantly checking in with your young self if they feel safe, what they would need to know, do, say, be, or have in order to feel safe to try this next thing to eventually get to the thing that has been asked. With the knowledge that a lot of this stuff also has to happen before you get on into the rehearsal space. You have to have done a lot of these questions to yourself so that you're not turning up having agreed to stuff actually that you're not comfortable doing. So then we do the incremental step process. And then there's a lot of embodiment practices using archetypes, using animal work, and then using my skill, which is around seeing where blocks are in the body and helping people energetically move the block so that then you can fully embody the specific nature of that character's sexuality. So let's say their sexuality is like really fiery and like raunchy or, you know, whatever. Okay, great. That's one archetype. But then there's also like, there's soft, cool rain. You know, that's like really like sensual and soft. Or maybe there's queen, you know. So we've got like all these different archetypes. Maybe there's boss bitch. Maybe there's killer, which is a, you know, hot archetype. Maybe there's predator. Maybe we're working with predator energy because that's what the character's energy needs to be. And not necessarily predator in a bad way, but predator in a predator and prey way, like beast energy, you know, which is often exiled in our community, sadly, because we haven't taught it with heart. We haven't taught it with awareness, how to be in touch with your animal nature in
Yes.
sexuality, in sex scenes, and at the same time have absolute energetic sensitivity to what's going on in your body and in the body of the person you're working with so that you can pick up on any closures and stop and address them. So we work with a lot of archetypes. We work with a lot of energetic subtleties to make sure that people feel safe and are in their body moment by moment. And in the sexuality masterclass, you can actually do the whole masterclass with not one moment of touch, and you will get as much out of it. So some actors go in going, yeah, I'm totally fine. I've done sex scenes before. I'm so fine. I just want to come and do the class because I'm curious. And by the end of the class, they've actually realized they've got all this stuff around their sexuality that they've completely trampled on in every sex scene they've ever done. All this stuff that needs to be met by themselves, traumas, closures, shaming, you know, unwanted energies from other people, lack of boundaries, whatever it is. And so the most valuable thing that some people get from the class is their no. I don't want touch. Now, that doesn't mean they don't want touch forever, but it might just be in that moment with that scene partner, or in that moment because they've just hit a porthole inside themselves of like, oh, fuck, the amount of times that I let something happen to me sexually that I didn't want. Okay.
I have one question to this because now we are talking about boundaries and limits. So, what's the difference? How do I realize if that is a boundary or if that is a limit where I have to push through, or it's
Yeah,
maybe
so
time
it's a
to
really
push
great,
through?
it's a really great question. So a boundary feels like this is healthy, this feels integrous. And to me, a limit feels like I so want to be able to have this thing or explore this part of me or let this part of me be seen, but I can't.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
Feels like there's something on top of you that feels like so overwhelming or so big or so bound or like such an old paradigm that's strangling you that you don't know how to open.
Yeah.
Right? And that would feel more like there's a limitation. And so what we work with is, okay, what are the limitations that you want to move through? Now let's go back and let's find what got formed in the system, what closure happened when you showed your bouncy, young, playful sexuality, or what closure happened when you showed your vampire energy, your want, your longing, your like, oh, you know, lust for blood. Like, so we're working with the primary place, like the origin of that. And in the sexuality workshops, I also work with a therapist. So we have a therapist there because a lot of stuff comes up for people. So
Yeah.
I work in tandem with the therapist to keep the the space really anchored in that if someone hits something, because a lot of people have sexual abuse trauma, you know, the averages are 1/3 right? Both men and women. Usually women report more, but it's usually around 1/3 of men or women who've been sexually assaulted, molested, or raped. So that's a quarter, like a third of the people in the room, more than a quarter. It's a third of the people in the room. And then you got another third that's dealing with violence from their history. So you've got all of that stuff alive in the bodies. In raw truth and performance, there's no touch in the entire workshop at all, not even a hug, no shaking hands, nothing, because we're not dealing with the incremental steps to get people to be able to have embodied touch with sensitivity, attunement to other and self, right? So the sexuality workshop, touch is allowed if it's consented to and if the person wants to explore that, and it's all within very tight boundaries and containers. You know, we're not like when we're doing sex scenes, unless you were making porn, which is not something that I teach or make, but unless you were doing that, you know, we're not. So like, for instance, we talk about erections. What happens if a guy gets an erection? An erection is an involuntary bodily response, right, to arousal. So the first thing we would do is remove all shame.
Yeah.
Right? Be like, oh wow, let's talk about erections, because erections happen. They're an involuntary bodily response. Now, because we're not making porn, we're not going to work with an erection. Instead, what we're going to do is notice, oh wow, that person feels aroused. So we're going to pause. We're going to allow time for that to dissipate. We're going to, you know, teach the men especially how to like move that energy out of a localized area from their genitals to move it, spread it through their whole body, learn breathing techniques to do that. We're going to teach the men how to say, I need to pause. Yeah. Or teach the women to say, I need us to stop because I'm sensing you're getting aroused. And we're also going to acknowledge that arousal is normal. Arousal happens. You know, actors, like when you're having to do a scene where you've got a gun pointed to your head and you're in fear, you're going to have adrenaline run through your system, right? It's that chemical response is going to happen. You're doing a scene where you're falling in love and you're all joy and you're getting married and it's just ecstatic. You're going to have a dopamine release. The actor is. So how can you do a sex scene and then be like, oh yeah, but you're not allowed to get aroused? Like that too can happen. You see like a gorgeous person dancing in front of you, or like, you know, trying to flirt with you or whatever. You might feel turned on, and that's okay. It's what we do with it. It's how we channel it. It's how we, and the same for women getting aroused. Like we're not like, oh, and now everyone's going to start having orgasms, right? We're going to be like, okay, you feel, you notice, you got your witness self, you notice the arousal, and you're going to channel, breathe that energy through your whole body, right? And note to self, now's not the time to orgasm, okay? But we teach you how to breathe it through the system so that you can be with the turn on if it's in service of character.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
So it's complex, it's beautiful, it's very healing, it's very much held with a sacred, there's a lot of boundaries around, you know, where you can touch, where you can't touch. And there's a lot of, it's very much empowering people with owning their boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. It's both masterclasses and all you do sound so awesome, incredible. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for everything you shared today. Is there anything left you want to mention that comes through right now?
Yeah, like just I want to send big love out there to all the actors and for your bravery to, you know, be in this industry. It's a really hard, my experience is it's a hard industry. It's tough because there's a lot of rejection that actors go through just by the nature of, you know, what directors are looking for a certain role, blah, blah, blah. But to keep the faith, keep persistence, keep the patience, keep the perseverance, and also keep doing the emotional work alongside the craft. You know, that would be my key takeaway to tell people is you got to keep doing the work, the emotional work, the somatic work, the spiritual work to stay alive and attuned to your instruments so that when you want to access something truthful, you can. And if you're in Berlin, or if you're in Europe and you want to come to Berlin, come along. They are in September, and you can find out about them through the Down Under Film Festival.
Yeah, so I'm gonna put the links and how you can apply in the show notes, of course. Thank you so much for
You're so welcome,
conversation.
Micah. It's so lovely to meet you, and just your openness is so beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I see you in Berlin.
I'd love that.
Yeah,
okay.
I will be there in the beginning of September. So
Oh, great. Okay, well, it's the 6th to the 8th of Berlin. So yeah, join up. You get what if you do want to join the masterclasses, you get a scene that I allocate in English and a scene partner, and I cast the workshops by looking at your show reel, looking at your bio, seeing what your objectives are, and when I watch the work, I'm seeing where your blocks are. Even though I've looked at some of them already and they're in German. I speak a little bit of German, but not enough to watch a whole scene and understand the whole thing. But when I'm watching it, I can see energetically where you're blocked, whether it's in English or German. And so then I allocate you scenes and a scene partner that's going to work that block, that's going to flush it up so that we have something to work on. So you rehearse a few times with that person before the class. It's intense. It's 12-hour days. It's 3 12-hour days. I work very, very hard. I have an amazing co-facilitator with me, Jack Doherty, who does men's embodiment work, and he's also an actor. So yeah, if you're up for deepening your relationship to your craft and your emotional being in service of character, come do the workshop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I recommend that to everyone out there who's listening and who feels that this is right for him or her. Thank you so much.
Lovely
I hope to meet you again. I'm thrilled about everything you do, and I wish you a lovely rest of the day. I mean, you started the day now, and hope to see you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I hope this conversation inspired you and touched something inside of you as it did for me. We would appreciate your feedback on this episode, which you can share with us on Instagram below this episode's post, or directly in the comments below the video on YouTube, or in a private message to my email address found in the show notes, along with all other links mentioned in the podcast. If you feel called to join Kim's Masterclass Raw Truth in Performance in Berlin, taking place from September 6 till 8, 2024, you can find more information and apply for the workshop on the Down Under Film Festival website. And if you have any further questions, feel free to contact me or the film festival team. Thank you so much for listening. I wish you a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you will join me in one of the next episodes again.